sense of parallel in what I've been researching and in what's happening here. And I've been working, with the community there and doing some interviews and some kind of hypothetical design process, but really trying to get a handle on what architecture is in this kind of environment, and is it a solution, or is it a register of what's happening, or is it, how does it relate to the transformations that are happening? And so there's kind of these videos, these are interviews with people and that I've been doing over the course of time, and then in front of them are three different, so that's LiDAR information. People have been talking about LiDAR a little bit. From the three different sites, it's government captured, basically scans of landscapes. There's this interesting kind of surveillance aspect of all this data exists. So it's printing it and then casting using local sand from the sites. So basically it's kind of trying to paint how the government's conception of these landscapes is, it has this kind of beautiful topography that's really enchanting, but at the essence it kind of doesn't actually record what's happening there materially and the kind of precarity of the material circumstances on the sites. So that's what those three chunks are. So they kind of require you to look closely to understand they're not just bricks. But yeah.
They're beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll talk to you.
All right. So I'm just going to walk through the rest of the pieces, and then we'll go in and have our final panels. This is a project by Andy Kim, who we met through a mutual friend. And Andy is working with us to create a new barn structure in our backyard because our barn is collapsing and has no foundation and cannot be saved. Do you want to say something more, Andy, about what you've got here?
Well, I think that this is the first on the presentation list, so I will save that for later. But
okay.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Okay, well, yeah, we're very proud. We just received a NISCA grant for architectural drawing, which they've never had before. This is the first one, so we're really on it. Then we have to raise the money to build it, but one thing at a time. And these are prints by Anna Musser, whose presentation we saw at the very beginning of the day. And these are pieces of flora and fauna that flora, not fauna. That's animals.
Flora.
I've had a long day. Okay, so plants that are here overlaid onto maps of the New York cityscape, and this one is Central Park with the Central Park Reservoir, which I never realized was actually a water repository for the city. And when Ronnie did her project, walking down from the Catskills, she brought all the water that she collected, she and her friends, to the Central Park Reservoir. So it's really beautiful. And this project, I'm going to ask you to talk about because I was running around like a crazy person and don't know what it is.
This also, I will talk about more in a little bit, but it's a small house in rural California in sort of the Santa Cruz outskirts or so, which I'm developing with another architect. But it's, I think, mostly I'll just talk about it later. It's in a landslide zone, it's in a wildfire zone, it's on the north side of the mountain. It's a kind of funny confluence of like environmental forces and also certain let's say like labor and financial forces, and I'll maybe leave it at that for now.
Well,
the
they're
roof
beautiful. They're beautiful together. It's really lovely. And then this piece here is by Richard, who gave the second remote presentation, and these are a kind of a gallery that's made out of grain silos. And he created this sculpture inside the gallery out of this kind of historic water tap. So he's referring to all of the aquifers beneath the ground. And I thought this piece was particularly interesting in the context that we're talking about because it talks about these silos, right? And that's a word that they use in business all the time, that people are siloed, like they don't share resources, they don't share a common language, they don't help each other. And so you know, by splitting urban and rural concerns, we're basically making it more difficult for everybody. So, I mean, if we could see that continuum and make that continuum real, you know, things might change. So, yeah, thank you. All right, well, thank you all so much for putting the show up. I never could have done it without you. You're amazing, amazing young people. And thank you.
For this panel, we have mostly architectural designers, and they are actually everyone's an architectural designer, I would say. But some are more building oriented, and some are more conceptually interesting work. We are joined by Jocelyn, who I went to school with, but also I've known her work from school, and I'm a big fan, and I really liked seeing her work at Princeton, especially. Nikki and Reese are the same, but they went earlier, so I won't really introduce them again. James Wood, I also went to school with, but James has an interesting project. I think he'll share with us. I think for me it is a politically interesting project, and Owen, who has an office called Chibernuni, which is like a pretty great name. It's just in and of itself, and I can't wait to hear about his rural projects. And Ian Erickson, I've gotten to know him over the last couple months, and he's cooking something up in I think rural Massachusetts, and he'll or somewhere, and he'll talk more about it in a bit. And I hope that it could be more of a shared conversation about what we've produced over the last couple months, and yeah, I'll go ahead and share my project first. I met Nancy through my roommate Dan Rodriguez, who was a student at Pratt Institute, and his writing teacher was friends with Nancy, I think, somehow. And Dan is one of my best friends and my roommate, who introduced me to Nancy, and I got to know her, and I got to visit this place last fall, I think, something like that. And when I came to this place, it was really small, and compared to when you think about like art residency, I didn't understand what that was. I just had no clue what that was, because I've never applied for one. I've never done one. I've never visited one, but it was really small and quaint, and I thought when I first walked into the space, you know, I was greeted by Homer and one of the regular visitor. I forgot his name, but he was there.
Mark.
Yeah, Mark was walking around with us, looking at the barn structure. So for me, it was like a different environment than like working in the city, right? But I have to preface this story by saying that I went to the bar next door, which was a pretty interesting experience. And then walking into the space, I felt pretty safe. So, yeah, so I'm just going to go to this list and tell you all the stories. But, so yeah, I think when we were talking about this barn project, you know, obviously we were thinking about the place, and I got to learn more about this the place as I got to know Nancy and everyone around this space. When we started talking about the barn, it wasn't really about rebuilding the same thing, but rather to produce a different kind of space, one that is about education, and one that is also about production and storage and all these different things. it was not just about these kind of predictable programs, but also something like interactive and space for music maybe. Like there was a component of exterior, which was really important, and that was, you know, a really exciting point of departure for me. So some of these criterias and conversations we're having. So as you can see, you know better than me that this is Prattsville. I'm sorry about the. Is it not advancing?
You see the map now.
Oh, got it. Yeah. And you know, so I don't know if you can see still, but there's a barn behind you immediately, and it's a pretty particular barn because there's an art sculpture attached to it, and when you open the door, it's not the interior of the barn, but a shrine, and I think that speaks to the greater narrative of the space, right? Because it's not, they have transformed something that is coming down, really rotting from the foundation up, into something more engaging and beautiful and interactive, maybe. And so, in this project, we're mainly looking at the barn, but I think it's more of a dialogue between the two structures. The main space for activities, real activities where things are happening, but this backup space, which is not really a backup space. I hope that when we finish the barn, it will become, you know, a much more engaging space. So the first order of business, let's say, was to think about like taking the cleaning things up and taking things down. If you look at the barn right now, it's really, it looks like it's falling apart, but the wood itself is really beautiful. It's native. It's cladded with native trees. I forgot the name of the tree. What was it?
The hemlocks?
Yeah, the hemlocks, and that, I think that material and that cladding has a rich history of Prattsville because that is the predominant lumber around this neighborhood. So one of the ideas is that somehow we have to think about reclaiming some of these woods. And as we talked about water in the first panel, and Prattsville is historically, I mean, from 2011 hurricane, there's a great concern with flooding, and there is a kind of desire to elevate the building as a whole, and that is one of the criteria that we're thinking about. And the second is the recladded fence, that we will reuse the materials from the barn and to produce a perimeter fencing around it, because right now there's nothing there really. There are plants and vegetations around them, but not really defined area. So this is the kind of sculpture I was talking about by Matthew. It's installed currently, but this was also written in the grant proposal that we did, that this was part of the scope of the project that we asked to do, is to have some funding allocated for the relocation of the sculpture to the fencing. And I think that like this is a project by Zumthor. This is a fence, but I think that there's a kind of sculptural element attached to it. That language of existing barn cladding structure, and which is, you know, similar to here, right? There's a kind of reclaimed wood structure that is attached to the existing barn that can be somehow translated into the perimeter fencing, and an object that can be attached to the linearity of the fence. So overall, like, these are some of the criteria that we looked at. We were interested in producing workshop spaces with light frame structure, which is more affordable, and it had to be elevated a couple feet, and in consideration with light and air, preserve the barn-like feeling, which is to say that there was an interest in my design interest to keep the kind of geometric language of the barn, especially from walking into the space, and produce a overhang space, which is like a gazebo-like space, to kind of protect the occupants from rain. So there could be some kind of so we can have a musical event or gathering even when the weather is bad, right? And one of the other things that accessibility was an issue, but also ease of maintenance, and that was really a big concern. Is like, how do you think about maintenance and cleaning the property, and like who's going to do them, and this was, I went back and forth with Nancy. Was like, oh, we have to clean it, we have to take care of it regularly. But I think ultimately, you can see here, like we're surrounded by people who can't really spend that much time laboring over maintenance, and so this is something that we thought about when we were looking at these design criteria. And these are existing material systems that we can use readily. And we also talked about, because it was a kind of polycarbonate facade, we also talked about like how we could use the material to make the polycarbonate more interesting as a medium that can be painted over or transformed over time, but also a kind of overhang space. I could go back to, I feel like I'm just talking without showing you any images, but it'll come. This is another thing that we looked at, which is to say the IRS estimate of useful life for constructing with some of these materials, like concrete foundation, CMU blocks, and pressure treated lumber or polycarbonate panels. These were some required criteria that needed to be considered when we were applying for the grant. And so I'll just quickly go through like some of the formal questions that I wanted to address when I was looking at the barn. Is to begin with the very simple skeletal system, or the formal geometry that we have currently, respecting the building footprint and the height, because that is something that we need to consider when we're trying to rebuild. So we shrunk the overall mass by 3 to 5 feet on each side to allow access so that we can clean the space after the fence is put on. And we looked at elevating the whole bottom level 2 to 3 feet, but putting steps there and an additional ramp on the side that can be detached. And we reversed this the roof pitch and upside down to produce this kind of overhang, which makes a Y and a structural system that mirrors in one of the sides. And we put in the second floor so that we could build a relatively taller sculpture from the inside, and we could use that also as a workshop space. So this is the overall. We considered the paving systems. This is the kind of plan. We're looking at accessibility from the back, potential elevator. This is the current elevation walking into the barn, and you can see from this side the shared driveway. You can say you can look at the barn from this side and be able to see the barn partially, and there's a big opening there which I kept to allow for ventilation. And this is the second floor here with the elevated foundation. And as you can see, the height allows for production of different size of sculptures, and could be used as a storage, but also a workshop. and we considered some of the issues, ventilation issues and thermal issues, and later on we have in this budget we have allocated for energy and structure. So we're also thinking about how this space could be used seasonally, and what are some of the patterns of occupation. So this is a kind of a crude, fast images that I produced, but this is like a person walking into the backyard, because it's really accessible from the public street, and you could see the barn from the public side. So this view, although it's kind of banal, but I think it's a quite important view that captures the barn in Prattsville in a unique way. And this is the overhang space where things are produced and made, but at the same time, in the inside, there could be a series of workshops.
Don't you need to switch the image?
Oh, doesn't.
Yeah, so my name is Jocelyn, and I'm a spatial researcher, architect, performer based in Brooklyn right now, but I'm originally from the Midwest, from South Central Wisconsin, and my family is from Wisconsin too, and my work is in Wisconsin, so I should probably just live here, but you know, life brings you away and it brings you back. And thank you so much for Nancy and Andy and all the folks for bringing me over for this. I mean, I live in Brooklyn, so it's not far, but it's really grateful to be involved, and it's so heartening to be in a group of people discussing these issues that are so important to many places across the country, but especially here. And so what I'm going to present today is some kind of different ongoing work that I've been doing with the community in the Driftless region. It's kind of parts and pieces. It's little pieces of text that I've written. It's little fragments of images and experiments, and so hopefully it forms some cohesive, but maybe it'll bring up more questions than answers, and then we can all talk about it, get out in the wash. So it's titled Counter Constructions of Midwestern Ruralism, and I'm going to start with a few videos, which is definitely going to bring my total time to over the 15 minutes, but hopefully they'll be important. They're also going to be in the gallery, so but they're, yeah, as I said earlier, discussions that I've been having with folks, and it'll introduce the issues that I talk about later.
We came here when we were kids, your age. And we spent our whole life
Really slow connection.
building a quiet.
1 second. I'm going to share the videos.
I went to college at River Falls.
Sorry. They're real slow, so I think I'm going to share them through here instead.
Welcome to the country.
Yeah, I know. Okay. Oh, now the sound is sorry. I'm trying to just reshare real quickly. Sorry about that one.
We came here when we were kids, your age. And we spent our whole life building a quiet, beautiful, and healthy home for us. Our children are in their early 40s. And all of a sudden, everybody, we're saying we're going to throw this all away. We're going to dig up everything here and put it in France. And so that's why we got involved. But our background, we started with 6 acres. And we added to it, every time a contiguous piece of land came up for sale, we found someone to buy it. So we bought the 110 acres we are at currently is the result of 50 years of working, saving, waiting, watching, buying, adding on, add to the machinery, add to the livestock. More information. I'm a retired high school teacher, so I was teaching and playing the strum until my retired in 2012. Kathy was insurance with sales.
When I retired,
When
yeah.
we retired. So in addition to raising our children here, and this was our retirement home, all this was through.
Yeah.
What made this area desirable is that it's elevated, so you can dig into the side of the hill. If you go to the right place, you dig into the side of the hill. There's the same kind of sands in much of the central sands area of Wisconsin, but it's at grade or below. So as it's easier to dig it out. But it was Monroe County, Jackson County, when you dig it out, it starts filling up with water right away.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's actually easier to get it out of these hillsides than in places like that where there's a clear layer, and it seems like it'll be easier, but the problem of getting rid of the water is a problem. When High Rush got going as a mining facility, they needed millions of gallons of water to wash the sand. So as it comes out of the ground, it's sand and dirt and all kinds of other things. It has to be washed to get to that point.
There were other landowners affected
Can't think of it.
around the mine, around that High Crush mine with their water problems. But the mining company would say, we'll replace your well if you sign this non-disclosure agreement. And you cannot talk against the mine anymore.
12 hours, and they can get up on their feet and start moving around and find the owner themselves. And at that time, they would be chilled to death. When we used to lamb starting in February. That was, God, it was always a race between would the lamb get milk fast enough before it would be 10 in here. If they can get a belly full of colostrum, that does them a world of good. It'll turn them right around.
There's another video as well. Is it okay? And it's a bit jerky. Like, is it okay to watch?
Yeah, it's fine.
I'll go through them.
I went to college at River Falls and I met John there. And I was one of two women in the College of Agriculture at that time, because so long ago. Now it's half women. But so he didn't have much to pick from. And I had a lot to pick from or whatever. And he had a farm and I had horses. So it was like, I don't know. So that's how I ended up here. We moved home from school. We finished a quarter early. We moved home in 1972. We've been farming here ever since. It's a long time. And we went from coming home from college, milking in 2 extension barns. John's parents had cows in one farm, and we had extension barn on another farm. Then we built a freestyle barn and combined them, and then we had a barn fire, and then we built one big barn for 250 cows, and then we went in with a partner, and we milked about 600 cows. Who wouldn't do anything else? And he's 5th generation, and he loves it. I mean, he loves it every day. He's not a complainer about anything, even though we're not making any money right now. We haven't made any money for about a year. because the milk price is so bad. He'll do it until we just absolutely can't do it anymore. I mean, that's the only thing he wants to do. So as a partner and as his wife, I really don't have any other choice. So if I had my choice, we wouldn't be, probably we would try to get out somehow, but I don't really have a choice. I mean, there's more to a frac sand mine than just digging up the hills. There's all kinds of water issues, there's reclamation issues. They kept telling everybody, oh, we'll put it back just the way it was, it will be better than the way it was. And I talked to so many reclamation soil scientists and reclamation people that said that's impossible, but they wouldn't listen to that. They didn't care. I guess that was the hardest part for me.
Yeah.
I just couldn't understand that really. The part for me was like the beauty, like Jeannie said, of the place, and how could you just trash it? Why would you do that? And why would you do that to your neighbors? That's the thing I didn't get. If you live in a beautiful place, you respect your neighbors. We get along. I mean, nobody is overly antagonistic to other people around here. We stay out of each other's way mostly. You don't get hate mail from people. I never got hate mail or anything like that. So why would you just purposely do that? It's like stick it in your face. I can just do this, and I don't know why. And maybe they didn't realize what they were really doing or care about. But the idea you could do it without caring about your neighbors, I don't think I've reconciled that yet. So because I suppose people would say, like, we have a big dairy, and maybe people think we don't. Maybe our neighbors don't like that. I don't know, but we don't see the same thing. I don't think a lot of people in this house understand how big this country is. Like, we talk about immigration. Do they have a clue how big it is and how much room there is for everyone? I mean, seriously? I just think it isn't any different. The Swiss people who came to this valley, when I came here, there were people who were new from Switzerland here. And they came here because other Swiss people were here that sponsored them or brought them here to work on their farms or whatever. It's nothing new. And it's just, like, we would not be going if we didn't have the guys working for us. Our barn is a flush barn. We clean the alleys with water. And we bed with sawdust, which is rare because most people bed with sand now. But we bed with sawdust, and then we separate those solids from when we flush, we separate the solids and compost them. And that's how we get our compost. The main reason we started the composting was because we're a CAFO, which means that we have all these regulations about how much manure we can put on our land. So we don't have enough land for all that manure. So the compost helps us get manure off the farm. So it's going like all over,
One more, sorry, and then I'll talk for a little bit.
When we came here, we decided it would be fun to restore the land the way it was before it was farmed. Because it's been farmed since the mid-1800s. And so I started sort of researching what had been here, and I was interested in restoration, habitat restoration before. So I knew a lot about it. I knew a lot about the plants. But I'd never done it on a scale like this before. So then the frac sand thing started, and when we first kind of realized what was going on, my vision of all this was, because it came so fast, was that we were going to be this little, beautiful remnant of what this area used to look like, and everything around was going to be devastation. So it was very scary, to think about like that.
What got us really going was that just over the hill, just this hill behind us, there's a farm that proposed a frac sand. And the farm was pretty scary because it's pretty close. It's only 2 or 3 miles away by line of sight, so we get to hear the blasting. But the thing that really kept us involved was that the trucks carrying sand away were going to go down that little windy road that you just drove. As many people around here are, the younger generations of the people like your grandparents, great-grandparents, who settled here, farmed the land, made a good living for their families, blah, 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 blah. The economy for farming land that's this hilly is terrible. And so, like most of the smaller farmers, this guy has like 200 acres or something. Not economic. So he was slowly, kind of by his fingernails, going out of business. And these intermediaries, these sharpsters who stood between the mystery real big corporation and the farmers, they would come to a guy like this and they would say, Mr. Smith, the long and the short of it is that we think we can take probably 1 million tons of sand out of your place a year, and we're going to pay you $1 a ton.
We had, I don't know, 100 and some people at the hearing, and we had piles and piles of submitted testimony that they had to read, all the named. And I think there were like 3 people who spoke in favor of mine, and everybody else was against it. So it was pretty overwhelming. It was great. And then we went out to the site. Well, all of us were prepared because we've done this before, so we all had our big coats and our big boots.
It was minus 20 actual, minus 40 wind chill. It was really a bad day.
But it was sunny and beautiful. And so we had all our stuff on, and the poor mining people, of course, had to wear their nice suits and their little coats. And then this pair of golden eagles flew through, and they came down and sort of circled around and back up. And I grabbed the microphone and said, those are golden eagles. And so it was just perfect. It was, because that was part of what we talked about was the environment. And they would have torn apart this whole valley. The golden eagles need for their winter. So there'll be a whole bunch of trees and they're all connected underground. If you cut one, the clone says, oh, I better send up some more. So it doesn't do any good to cut that. You have to sort of trick it, and we do that by girdling the trunk. When the leaves come up, they're often purple. And I think it's because they're trying to absorb more heat and light. So that's a strawberry leaf, and that one's Golden Alexander's. And they're both, later on they'll both be bright green, but now early in spring.
So those are excerpts from conversations that I had with folks, and it talks a lot about as you heard, about the frac sand mining, which is becoming a big thing, or which became a big thing and then was kind of banished by the community, but has moved elsewhere. So it's this kind of it's a moving target, I think. Anyway, so I have a text that I wrote about the way that I attempted to kind of understand this problem using architecture as a registration device, but then I'm kind of going to go on to talk a little bit about how architecture is changing in the way that it's addressing this, and I'm kind of feeling a bit of futility, so I'm looking for other options. So America's rural Midwest is a technical landscape, a factory floor in which agrarian ideals are tested against material realities. As the land and waterways have been shaped and reshaped over the past centuries, these extractive transformations were registered materially within the region's buildings. A symptomatic scar tissue structure, the rural maintenance shed plays a special role in these processes, housing the tools and materials necessary to preserve the systems which surround and move through it. Agnostically utilitarian and innately selfless, the shed facilitates an uneasy translation between different scales of maintenance. Landscape-wide operations that strip trees from a hillside or mine frac sand from a farm field, and small-scale repairs that occur on a specific cracked foundation wall or leaking ceiling panel. The surplus, waste, and wreckage which exceed the urban-imposed frame of bucolic American ruralism are housed, albeit leakily, in the shoddy shelves of the shed. Dutifully and futilely veiling the erosive material's presence, the structure not only maintains surrounding landscapes and buildings, but the constructed image of a productive and happily agrarian American heartland. In this sense, as my project attempts to articulate, the maintenance shed is not a type, but a method of registration, translation, and reinscription. So these are the sheds that I ran into in Buffalo County. This project focuses on Buffalo County, a hilly and sparsely populated area in western Wisconsin, the ancestral homeland of the Ho-Chunk, Sauk, and Fox nations, in which my great-great-grandparents first homesteaded from Scotland in the 1860s. The area, called the Driftless Region, has undergone continuous transformation at the hands of settler colonial landholders over the course of the 20th century, from logging to river dredging to agriculturalization to industrialization. The most recent of these transformations, emboldened by loose zoning laws and the permissive state DNR, is that of frac sand mining. Between 2008 and 2018, over 500 acres of Buffalo County was leased or purchased by corporate mining operations, which excavated and shipped silica-rich sand to South Dakota and Pennsylvania to be injected into fissures for sand fracking. So someone once called it land-scale liposuction, because it's like taking sand and injecting it elsewhere. Under these increasingly precarious conditions in which the land itself becomes the resource to be extracted, the maintenance shed's position becomes destabilized. The shed becomes a kind of self-obliterative, cruel optimism, either overburdened and falling into decay, or existing in a domesticated, commercialized Platonic, an ideal type of taupe extruded vinyl, $7.99 at Home Depot. In attempting to register this scale of late Anthropocenic geotrauma, the shed can no longer dutifully maintain its appearance, but must reckon with the soil on which it stands as both symptom and solution. Oh, this is just a little video. It's not going to work. On to the next one. Over the past 2 years, I have visited and revisited Buffalo County for weeks at a time, shadowing and conducting a series of interviews with members of the community. In discussing the pressing concerns of frac sand mining, our conversations unearthed a network of other material transformations which tie the people to their land while destabilizing the ground beneath their feet. Drawing from these experiences and interrogating the definition of maintenance, I proposed a new methodology, shedding, in which waste materials from ongoing operations, meat production, deforestation, industrial dairy farming, river dredging by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and mining are reinscribed into the structure of the shed itself. Fully disassemblable and denying domestication, this open network of 5 sheds not only registers the abject, but externalizes it, making the material visible and accessible, and laying bare the precarious contingencies on which each structure is entangled. So each of the 5 sheds that I articulated is based in the conditions and operations of a specific site, drawn from site visits, photography, video, and conversation. Materials: cow manure, the wool of meat sheep, dead wood, dredged sand, and overburden, or the topsoil stored and made infertile through the process of sand mining, are transformed as they register on the structure. As manure fiberboard panels, wool insulation, I'm going through these real fast, sorry. Wall infill. Five-gallon bucket formed dredged sand columns. And adaptive soil lime CMU blocks. This project also takes modeling not only as a representational strategy, but as an embodied, I'll go back through mine, in which ideas come into friction with material reality. I constructed 5 1:4 scale models, so quarter scale, from scratch, from reclaimed and reformed materials. These were situated on mis-scaled sites in which the square mile around each structure, in reality, is extracted from government LiDAR data and inscribed into dimensional lumber. So you can see these kind of messy sites that are translating government information into really bad quality lumber. That was all I could afford at the time. As Catherine Youssef explains in Epochal Aesthetics, the Anthropocene marks a material cut into bodies, real, actual, specific, vulnerable bodies, bodies of those that do not get to count as human in the current biopolitical order, bodies of earth, bodies of non-human organisms, social and geologic bodies that matter. In shedding, buildings do not only register these material cuts, but perform a kind of sympoetic staying witness, laying bare the contingencies between nature and humanity. As structures within the community are repaired with abject materials from these shedding counter-constructions, the extractive primary operations are undermined. In doing so, shedding reveals a latent rural aesthesis, one in which the body is sensitized to their surroundings and counter-economic systems stretch far beyond the site. So the idea is that these sheds are constructed from materials that could be re-offered to the community, basically waste being reappropriated and used to repair surrounding infrastructures. We can go through this video quite fast. So this is going to be the last bit of the presentation. Is basically questioning the notion of abjection, which has been the central focus of basically the shedding exercise, but is where I'm going with things, I think. So this is a text that I wrote, and the prior video is actually a video of when I went to my great-great-grandparents' homestead outside in Buffalo County, which is now owned by the local Rod and Gun Club, who are very kind men who allowed me to just wander onto the site, but they said, so the original cabin that my great-great-grandparents built in the 1860s was there, and basically 2 weeks before I arrived, they had demolished it. Yeah. Yeah, because they didn't, it's interesting because their families are also from the area, so you would think that they had this, but they don't, the generations are more divided. Like my grandpa told me it was there, but their parents didn't tell them who owned it, so they didn't know, and it was becoming a hazard, and it was falling down, and rain got it, it was rotting, so they took it apart and they didn't want anything to be damaged. And they were actually very apologetic, and it was really interesting to talk with them and like kind of have those conversations. Like, it's fine, I understand that the present is not like, you can't hold on to nostalgia, but then it was interesting because they were like, well, do you want some pieces of it? So then that's what that video was. I'm just hacking up the, so I still have that chunk of cabin. that I just carry around and I don't know what to do with. It can't be a coffee table, you know, you just can't have it be a coffee table. But yeah, so anyways, that's basically how my whole question about shedding, how all the interviews started happening was that process, because I started thinking about how material moves throughout space in rural areas. And so this is the last text that I'll read. And accompanying it are these pictures from the Wisconsin State Historical Archive, basically photos of Buffalo County, which is, I've fed through an algorithm to take away the subject and the background, so basically, hopefully what is left is the abject, but only, I guess, through the lens of some weird, like, neutered digital interface. So, like, no one agrees with it. Everyone who sees these thinks that there's value there, so I think that's the real question. So, buildings exist in a continuous process of becoming, of matter over time, and of microscopic distance, of a dust particle from its source, of a paint flake from its wall. Each abject fragment reveals the incompleteness of the whole. The human's impact on their environment is rendered legible, if not material, the fluctuating relationality in which we are each structured and unstructured. We spend our lives bumping into things until one of the things kills us. Language creates a shroud around architecture and portrays it as complete, but there's always a lack, a gap. It's an issue of precision, of tolerances, of rounding errors. If you look close enough or rub your finger along the edge, you can see the undoing. Material reduced to fibers, wood ground to pulp, joint pulled apart, door frame smudged, curve spined into segments. The building denatures, the image fractures. It becomes a precarious assemblage. The privilege of distance is no longer possible. The structure is much more beholden to its occupants at this scale and proximity. Waste, as Mary Douglas defines it, is matter out of place. Material undergoes a semiotic shift. It is rendered abject by time and distance. The abject, not object, by Kristeva's definition, is an excretion, a rejected non-material clinging to the edges of the subject and confronting us with our own finitude. In this, it obscures borders, creating a spatial ambiguity between subject and objectified surroundings, and a temporal precarity, a feeling of perpetual danger. It discomforts us. We bind things tighter, clean up the edges, repair the holes. We become more intimate with the space through these efforts, and it continues to crumble around us. There's a certain softness to decay, time rendered in two bodies, beating their edges ragged against one another. Within rural space, where relations are strongly dependent on diurnal and seasonal rhythms, temporality's infrastructural relationship to daily life is less easily veiled. A farmer's work is never done. The incompleteness and precarity of existence encourages a reabsorption of the abject and an acceptance of our own finitude. Animals die, are killed, and are born. Seeds are sown and harvested. Old machinery is left to rust, buildings falling to ruin by precarities of weather and climate. Time works slower in the country. It pulls backwards against the forward drive of metronormative productivity. It is rendered material, sticky even. Efforts are made to clean and repair, but slow time renders this labor inefficient. The land becomes the subject. It is mutually co-constructed and redefined by the beings which occupy it, are entangled within it, are rendered abject from it. It is territorialized and re-territorialized, and we are sloughed away with each passing generation. Matter loses place over time. The rural is implicated in the abject. Rural space's unique temporal and relational conditions undermine the false completedness of architecture and propose a radical new ontology that precariously relates matter, building, the active body, and the process of becoming. My great-grandfather's 1864 homestead exists in trunks of wood on a shooting range in rural Wisconsin. I carry a piece of it in my truck. Yeah, so I have more, but I think it's good to cut here. So thank you guys for having me. I'm excited to see what
Yes, I'm James. I work recently as such, small practice with Adair Brown, who's a friend of mine, both based in New York. Like Andy, it's a kind of like apartment situation. What I'll say before starting, other than extending many thanks for being here, I have to say, like, I spent a long time in rural Virginia, and this has very much the feeling of the kind of DIY spaces. I mean, I think you mentioned there's just nothing to do. so you have to somehow make
Rowan said that.
something happen. Or Rowan, sorry. But no, I mean, I think that the energy, it feels good. Adair, my work partner, and I know each other from an organization called the Architecture Lobby, which is an organization that tries to deal with both practically and, let's say, rhetorically, through literature, pamphlets, whatever, with architects as workers, architects in terms of their place in a labor matrix, in terms of the building industry, all this stuff. So neither of us work super closely with it anymore, but I think that background colors the work, and I think these issues of sort of labor will come up. You saw sort of the model and stuff. To give a bit of a background on the client and sort of the premise of the project, which in many ways is the most interesting part. It's a kind of, as many client relationships are, sort of some random kin network by which you arrive at someone who needs some service or whatever. In this case, it's two members of different anarchist organizations basically in the greater Santa Cruz region. So one way to start the story is with the Situationists, for instance, maybe, but slightly more recent is with the Tikunist Anarchist Collective, which was a sort of Parisian collective who distributed a lot of media. One of their contributions, let's say, to this kind of thinking was the idea of the ZOO, which I believe is the zone of total opacity. I forget what the second O is, but basically thinking of a way of practicing one's political life as making enclaves against, let's say, normative capitalist flows. The term anti-capitalism, I think, is largely attributed to them in terms of becoming like extremely popular. Randy, our client, or Miranda, is a person of not great means, not much older than me, who works in and around Santa Cruz, which is, as with everywhere, becoming insanely, impossibly expensive. So she is working with a sort of a group based on some of these anarchist ideas, a group that has more or less like found ways of sharing funds for like loan procurements, down payments, sort of ways in which a kind of mutual aid structure is being used to develop, let's say, develop the material conditions of the constituents. So that's kind of one side of it, one sort of like tradition, let's say. The other side, the person who we actually know, to sort of Miranda, the client, is a contractor who we're working directly with, who spent a lot of time in the, I believe, the self-build scene, which I was not a part of in Virginia, but part of the self-build scene in San Francisco, and through that developed a kind of knowledge base and is now more or less trying to find different ways to build affordable housing for his friends. So we are hoping to work with him a lot more to develop sort of prototypical rural housing. What I'll show from here on is sort of just the development with me and Adair as designers working with, let's say, these two specific people to try and develop one kind of very cheap house in the rural Santa Cruz region. Just to show the specifics of the site, we have Santa Cruz down here, San Jose up here. The site is actually in Boulder Creek, which is about an hour from both. Miranda mostly is hoping to use it as a sort of both her house, obviously, but also a potential office. She's a music therapist, so another huge part of this project is how to break up. On the one hand, it's a kind of idyllic, almost Thoreau kind of shack, and yet it needs to perform this sort of a public, needs to perform almost the way sort of mixed-use building would perform in a rural context. The other thing I mentioned in sort of the primer outside was the confluence of environmental factors. This is the sort of survey as we received it, where it's, I'll show you more in a sec, it's hard to make out, I know. This is actually a house which burned down and which also is part of the funding procurement for this in a wildfire some like 10 or 15 years ago. So it's a region which has wildfires with some frequency. This is a fire rebuild. You can see all of the dots that are pockmarking this drawing are like 60 to 70 foot tall redwoods, which I'll show you more of in a second. And you can see all of this sort of a haphazard infrastructure that lines the east part of the site. Simple retaining walls, which basically try to help navigate what is a very steep topography, where our client wanted to build kind of right on the precipice. As one does, which I don't blame her for. So this gives you sort of like, if we look at just quickly, this zone down here being this kind of like pull-in zone, you can see this is the site, a kind of cracking asphalt, working but somewhat sketchy kind of infrastructure. So for the existing house, and then sort of the general condition where we're trying to like create something which slots between this kind of field of towering redwoods. So this is really the brief. 900 square feet. Originally the budget was 400K, which, if I don't know if you've built enclosures, is, you know, like nothing actually. Space for living and working, performance space inside and outside, and then trying to sort of reconcile these like environmental forces. I should say, in a way I'm going to kind of show you two projects. I'll breeze through sort of phase one and then show you how kind of things fell apart and sort of the direction things are moving, which have more to do with the model out there. But in thinking of a kind of house which has to perform a dual function as, on the one hand, domestic space and a sort of more public music therapy office, let's say, the sort of first idea we had, which we were moving forward with, was just to cut a hole. So to kind of, within a very simple kind of hut, cutting a hole, kind of what used to be done in the south for ventilation with the dog trot typology, just to make two, to separate self and other, resident, guest, live, work, whatever the two are, that somehow this gap produces in a kind of otherwise more or less normative house some kind of excitement around a way to live. And even thinking about how a porch could potentially be a sort of performance space which would work as sort of a singular outdoor room, or to be able to open and sort of extend into thinking of like the length of the house as a kind of a theater or music hall. So to show a couple more images of how sort of we imagined it slotting between trees. So around December, there's also all sorts of, I mean, you know, I could go into it, there's all sorts of like timeline considerations, interest rate considerations. There was a certain grant which we narrowly missed because of this kind of condition. It's all this sort of like juggling act of these sort of forces. But at a certain point, with the interest rates, she started getting serious about what she could afford in terms of a, she's trying to basically pay more or less what she's paying now for rent, and just sort of set that in stone as what she'll pay as a kind of construction loan mortgage for the next however long. And yeah, I mean, I don't think I need to explain the slide any further. So we thought we already had a very tiny house, considering everything that it needed to do. So we were a bit dismayed by this, but also as, I don't know, anyone who's worked in architecture I feel like knows something happens with a massive budget slash that has the potential to make the project much more disciplined, much more streamlined, and much more precise in a way in terms of how it deals with its factors. So the more we looked at the spreadsheets, the more and more it felt like we were just doomed, as it were, to reconstitute Langer. This is an image of a famous sort of like frontispiece of an architectural treatise, The Primitive Hut, giving a kind of supposed origin of architecture coming out of, you know, the trees with your classic naked baby and all the rest of it. The image that, at least for me, has become significant is this, the still from Fitzcarraldo, which I hope most of you know, Werner Herzog movie where Klaus Kinski tries to bring opera to the Amazon and in doing so needs to move a boat over a mountain. And there are obviously kind of many things about this image that are compelling. But I think for us, working in a project where we know that there's going to be so much standardization, so much normativeness, what's striking about this image, maybe about Herzog's work in general, is that, of course, you know, it's misty, there's a certain color gradient, it has certain qualities, but in a way, all of those qualities pale in comparison to the content, which is that there is a ship floating on the hill in the Amazon. So, we have low battery, let me... sorry, one second. Alright, it's no longer angry at me. But I think, thinking as an architect, as a kind of formalist, maybe, in a certain way, there are things about this boat, right? It's an unlikely, it doesn't matter what the boat looks like in a way. It's just the fact that it's the boat as a kind of object which is always defined by the horizontal datum of gravity as it relates to water is at an angle, and that it's at a height or at a limit where it's sort of not supposed to be, this kind of like surreal, absurd object. So looking actually more and more at our spreadsheets, we realize that this might be, in a way, taken directly from Herzog, a possible strategy for, or taken from Klaus Kinski, sorry, a possible strategy for dealing with this condition of how to get something, some architecture, something special, out of an otherwise very normative house, just by, basically just by attending to the specificity of the site. What we found was that in terms of our takeoffs, this radically reduced the square footage of like facade material, of structural material. It's a kind of a decision that felt absurd at first until it felt sort of like the only thing that made any sense. So the kind of house as it has developed is, again, a relatively normative sort of pitched roof, and I'll show you some of like kind of the register of details that we're working in later. But basically a series of platforms, as it were, sort of 4 platforms that follow the landscape, which, yeah, my hunch, this is an image that one of my friends in Virginia actually sent to me of a random shed he's building. But I think seeing this image somehow convinced me that there was a kind of power, let's say, or a kind of good sense in a weird way in this sort of like big tilted roof. So I will briefly sort of take you through kind of the drawing set as it exists now, and maybe say a couple closing things, but I think this is pretty much it. So you can see sort of like the field of trees, we hug basically the back setback. The county requires 2 minimum that we could find is 9-foot diameter water tanks to run the sprinkler system in case of subsequent sort of wildfires. And the whole thing basically slopes down this way. The sort of idea of the theater or the performance space is still in here, but another thing we've done is phased it such that the kind of interior work will be built first, and then if you have a kind of primitive hut fallen across the landscape as one part of the project, there will be a future sort of clearing that Randy will use as a porch and also potentially as a kind of performance space for certain kinds of like community events or just maybe professional sort of like music therapy situations. So thinking of this thing as a kind of phased project more. But yeah, to show you briefly the plan, these are all the images that are on the wall anyway, but a kind of entry in a very compressed middle zone here, a large living room, a large kind of office or music room, And the only way you can sort of make the square footage, the materials work, is basically by turning the bedroom into a kind of nook, which, so there's a sort of nook and then sort of actual space on either sides of the project. And, I mean, we just like that because of the tilt, this sort of makes this amazing drawing when you cut a plan through it. So, I mean, elevations, nothing you haven't seen, I think, outside. The one last thing maybe worth mentioning is that it's a very normative project. The roof tilts. The other kind of thing which we have been working with the contractor to do is simply make the slope of the roof very steep, so that not only does, even in these small rooms, become kind of generous, but there becomes room for some sort of storage or attic space which will be left unfinished at this stage, and then potentially sort of colonized at later points in her life. So thinking of this thing as like, even in its, as always a kind of in-process thing, always a kind of thing which has the potential to be reconfigured, even after everything is set, albeit without applying for new building permits. As you can see, kind of shelving along the hallway, the floor is stepping up. And this, I mean, I kind of love this image, which just shows, it's hard to tell, but all of the datums are aligned, and this sort of just like shows a kind of series of CAT scans through the thing as it steps down the mountain, or down the hill. And then the last thing, which maybe is not remarkable, I don't have so much experience in architecture in a way. I mean, enough to be dangerous. But we're fascinated by our conversation with the structural engineer, which when we gave him the plans, we basically said, listen, we need to do this with as little concrete as possible, with as little excavation as possible. And his solution, which I would never have dreamed, was to actually build the entire foundation as a sort of tilted grade beam. So in the end, the sort of roof and the foundation are actually dealing with the landscape in exactly the same way. And the shearing is not just a kind of formal caprice, but is really something which is embedded in the DNA of the project. So we're at a stage now where we are sort of updating all of the spreadsheets and working with the contractor to price, and we'll sort of are hoping to kind of move forward shortly. I'll close on maybe a couple images of how we imagine the project might look. We're also working, one of the, or maybe it's not the perfect closing comment, but I think one other thing with this entire process, obviously the standard labor organization of an architectural project is that you design and then you bid out the project and contractors come back to you with different bids. We've been working with sort of the builder, the person who will be laboring, along with, we think, probably ourselves in 6 months or so to make this thing happen. But I have to say that after working in this way, I find it absolutely ludicrous that you could work any other way. And it's been really remarkable, and I think it is something that the industry needs to just find more ways to get better at, with the kind of separation between the disciplines, which I think we all know is absurd, but which we accept because it's simply the way in which everyone is legally comfortable. So with this labor configuration, because we're more or less only paying for materials, the contractor is giving a kind of very, very generous sort of flat fee. We can work with construction methods which are materially cheap but labor intensive, as long as they don't sort of like destroy the fundaments of the building or question the fundaments of the building. So one thing we're working with is a kind of fiber cement or wood impregnated fiber cement shingle system, something that sort of looks back to a kind of tradition in, to some degree, the East Coast, but really I think all over the US. But working with the kind of fireproof materials so that this thing, in addition to sort of formally being an incarnation of the landscape will also sort of show it will have a kind of fireproof cloak that is also dealing with, I don't know, let's say its own history of being burned alive, let's say a generation earlier. And I think I'll end there.
Hi, thanks. I'm Owen. Thank you to Nancy, to Andy, to everybody on the team for doing this. Such meaningful and beautiful projects that everyone's been presenting. This may be a bit of a contrast to that. I am part of a team that runs a nonprofit architecture gallery in Soho, Manhattan, and a printmaking studio. And same people who are involved with that are also involved with something called Chibernuni, which is an architecture design firm. I'm just going to present two projects which have to do with the rural landscape in some way. And also just kind of what we wanted to do when we started the firm. And it's not just me, and it hasn't only been who's operating it right now, which is me, Clara Simon, Gus Crane, but at a certain point we were maybe 5 people. We have a kind of odd tradition of living together on the projects that we work on. So it's like kind of had different instantiations of a commune of sorts. So what we wanted to do when we started the firm was to make drawings and build, but we didn't have any money, we didn't have any clients. But we could draw, you know, so we thought we could at least. And so the way to do it is kind of get your hands dirty, get involved with grassroots organizations, get involved with small communities and try to make a difference. Also build the things yourself. You don't have any money, can't really hire a contractor, don't really have like a formal client other than like a collective of people. So that's what we tried to do. The first series of projects that we did was build fences. We built a whole bunch of fences in like suburbia in Princeton, New Jersey, where the commune was living at the time. Eventually the fences led to house projects, like because the client of those fences realized that we weren't fence builders, but we were architects, or at least trained as architects. And then shortly after that we started getting involved with this nonprofit organization in Calhoun, New York on the Delaware, which is about an hour and a half southwest of here. Still within this watershed. And this organization had bought a double coal silo and its adjacent way station for like $7,000 because it was in disrepair, and it's on Main Street. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's a pretty cool place. This organization wanted to take the double coal silo and turn it into an artist in residence and gallery, and the way station as a kind of community porch in a way. This is after we had done a phase of the renovation, just to basically bring it to life. It was a very, very minimal intervention, just essentially bringing water and electricity to the building, creating a platform for people to gather. It's not always as busy. This is during the annual tractor parade down Main Street. But it's in a community that has a population with diverging politics and culture and things like that, and it aims to be a place that that people can come together and have conversations. I think that one of the most important parts of this nonprofit that operates it is that it's an educational place. So bringing people together by teaching things. The things that they teach are drawing, soup making, kind of performance and things like that. Here's just a quick drawing of it. Essentially, we just cleaned it up and put a platform in. It was a very, very simple project. This is during an informal drawing workshop before we put in the slab for the basically what is the porch. The second project, which is I'll get into a little bit more in depth, is an apiary, which is a farm for bees, on a farm in central New Jersey, in between a river and a canal. So it's like essentially it's flooding all the time. And during Hurricane Irene, it flooded really, really bad. So bees, we learned, don't like to swim. So we decided that we needed, if this farm wants to have bees and have flowers for bees and produce honey, that the bees would need to live on a platform that is above a certain level. So we built 3 heights of platforms on the 10, 50, and 100 year flood lines. And it's also a place for the human farmers and other people to come and learn about beekeeping, to learn about this particular way that we were building, which is more timber framing, to learn about sort of other experimental farming practices, and to have large harvest feasts and parties. The really nice thing about this project is that it is continuing to be built, and it's continuing to be sort of occupied, and we are now more and more involved with its programming, which is something that I think is kind of special about this particular project, in which it's not like we were just hired by a client for a project and like sent the shop drawings or the CD set and then watched it grow. We have to actively kind of get involved and do building projects and hold workshops there and things like that. We decided to locate the project in the woods, which was like a really weird idea. By the way, while we were building and designing this project, we lived on the farm. It doesn't have a house or anything, but we had a small Airstream trailer that we lived in. And because we located it in the woods, we, for the first 2 months of building it, we just were clearing the woods, and it was just thorns and poison ivy and wild grapevines and things like that, and it was pretty awful. But in clearing the woods, we found what used to be, or were foundations for old Dutch barns and houses, 3 or 4 structures. So the project started to become a little bit of a archaeological dig, and anything that we would find, we would sort of question whether or not it was always here or it was somewhere else. And we tried to use this project as a way, not of building on those foundations explicitly, but kind of framing them in a way that they would be protected in the future. So we had just no money. The farmer had no money, but we could kind of scrape up enough money just for the material. And we tried to use as little material as possible. So that would mean large span, kind of carving the wood in ways. I guess this is a diagram of one of the joints that were used in the project. This is a drawing of 3 kind of aspects of the project, at least in the first phase of it. Something really nice about building on a farm is that you can it's not that you can get away with things, but you can sort of use it as a opportunity to experiment with different ways of building that you don't really have to get past like building officials. So and which was sort of fun for us. But I mean, the whole thing had to be utilitarian, had to be kind of useful. Bees had to live on it. The humans had to like not fall off and things like that. But we could do things that we were just wanted to try out. So one of the things we wanted to do was build a spiral stair, but in section, not in plan, so that it would kind of like get steeper as it went up or something like that. If you were to imagine the stair to continue going, it would be like end up being a spiral, which is like a stupid idea, but we just wanted to do it. And because it took as much material as it would to make a regular stair, and we were building it anyway, we could just like do that. We would have, I guess this picture down here is kind of hard to see, but parties and things like that for harvesting of not of the honey in this particular case, but of the buckwheat, which was being fed to the bees, and we made soba, and we had buckwheat pancakes and meals and things like that. And I think that that's just really important, to bring people together, figure out ways of bringing people together and creating a community around something. Seems really meaningful, and you could do that through food really easily. We do it with the gallery. The only reason people show up to the gallery is because we offer free wine and drugs. Yeah, they show up. This is a sort of axonometric drawing of the whole first phase of it, and then a couple of the different joints that we used. Other things you can do, like just small side projects, which I think is really, really important when starting a firm. If you get a real project with a real client, like to always maintain your sense of wonder and experimentation, and doing that with side projects. So these sort of tetrahedron, inspired by buckwheat seeds, kites ended up being a version of deer scares to keep deer away from different crops. We built all of our own bee boxes that had their own little language that we can identify. Not the most useful, but sort of playful, which is cool. We built fences, but like you're on a farm, you don't really want like a proper fence. You want to allow animals to come through, but you want to try to, anybody who is approaching, this farm is also on a youth soccer club like property, so there's like some soccer players wandering around sometimes. So to have some structures that kind of told people that you're not supposed to go somewhere without really forcing them out was something fun. So we were inspired by Czech hedgehogs, which are instruments of war in a way. They're anti-tank devices which stop tanks from crossing a land, but we made them in the same structure. We made different sizes of them, really big ones, really medium ones, and really small ones, and you can sort of tumble them across the landscape, which is pretty fun. And then recently, both of these projects really we submitted for the U.S. Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, whose theme was Porch, the Architecture of Generosity, and we submitted both of these projects, one being, well, our definition of a porch is that it had to be a kind of elevated platform and it had to have a roof. We didn't really have anything that fit both things, but we had one of each. So the first one is all roof and the second one is all platform. And we built this sort of half drawing, half model out of folded, screen printed and folded aluminum with wooden elements on it. And the nice thing about this was that it wasn't just a revisiting of the previous design, but we used this object to continue to design into the project. So like these elements here are our future little towers that we're going to be putting in there, and we have a kind of like hypostyle thing, which is a big party table, which currently exists in another project, which we will relocate to the farm. Oops. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, so I'm Ian. Thanks again, Andy, for the invitation. And what I'm going to present today is a work in progress from the office I just started with a few friends, COBE, or the Collective Organic Building Initiative. And the work is kind of very much a work in progress, including the kind of name, the provisional title of which is thermal hybrid. And what it really is a structure, a single structure that hybridizes a greenhouse, sauna, and compost toilet all in one, and seeks to kind of leverage and produce new atmospheres from the different kinds of heat that are released, emitted, absorbed, and transmitted across these three programs. And I would also say that our collaboration itself, myself, Nikki, and Vincent, seen in the photo below, is also a kind of work in progress. We first started working together about a year ago, meeting in an incubator at MIT called Design X, which is this kind of business-oriented, built environment, pitch venture capital environment that forced us to produce a kind of very technologically driven project, or I should say product-forward solution for the built environment that was looking at kind of tracked QR code-enabled sensor SIP replacements that were using agricultural byproducts like straw and hemp to produce building panels, and through going through the process of like let's say pitching and like thinking through an architectural practice also as a kind of business or venture, we've been taking a step back over the last 6-8 months to kind of adjust our priorities about how we want to operate and collaborate together and what kind of projects we want to take on. And so our kind of adjusted title and framework, COBE, the Collective Organic Building Initiative, seeks to kind of craft locally responsive spaces through a collaborative research-driven process that responds to the unique cultural, ecological, and material systems surrounding each site that we're working on. And we explore assemblies of low-carbon, organic, and reused materials through a synthesis of both low-tech and high-tech methods. We've taken on a few kind of early projects, one of them seen here in rural Michigan, where we were using a drone to use photogrammetry of an existing 1890s barn on a 3 generations cherry orchard, scanning both visually of the kind of internal and external architecture of the barn, but also thermally as we began to speculate on what this frame might become in the future, as well as most recently, just being in Venice for the opening a few weeks ago, we contributed a material panel sample or like swatch or shingle for this project called VAMO that was a collaboration between a lab at ETH and a lab back at MIT. And in this case, we can see our panel on the bottom left. We were using reclaimed waste wool from one of the last remaining wool mills in the United States in upstate rural Connecticut. So in a way, the rural has been a through line in these early projects since our kind of pivot in our collaboration together. And this project that I'm presenting today, the kind of greenhouse sauna compost toilet hybrid, didn't begin in either of the ways that the two projects did, which is to say it didn't originate with a material idea or even a site, but rather a diagram like this, which was a network of kind of actors and stakeholders implicating us in a process that was begun by actually a compost toilet company in Vermont who had approached a pair of doctors operating in the rural context of Vermont, like 30 minutes outside of Burlington, to produce within a greenhouse that the clients already wanted to construct, a kind of exceptionally beautiful environment for a compost toilet to use as kind of marketing material. And so we became implicated as both like designers, material sourcers, and like organizers of labor and aesthetic. And in the kind of framework of the project as a kind of marketing demonstrator, the first act of design actually was to kind of diagram the narrative of the various programs involved, adding, based on the client's own request, a kind of sauna, throwing it into the mix of the greenhouse and compost toilet, and thinking through the kind of different inputs from solar radiation to rainwater, as well as more ambient exchanges of like biothermal heat from the toilet or residual heat from the sauna, relating to existing water storage and producing new rituals of kind of washing, dressing, and like metabolic processes of the body and of plants. And so this is the site. It's right next to a kind of large river in the existing home, as well as outbuilding of the clients. And so we subjected the site to kind of initial research, first looking at high and lows of 1,000-year flood levels, as well as thinking through the kind of like climactic and solar rhythms of the site, as well as research into the kind of vernacular intelligence of passive solar greenhouses, them wanting to be oriented true south with a kind of thermally massive wall on the north side that absorbs and kind of re-emits the heat from the sun, a big plastic wedge. And so with that, our initial instincts were to place it on the site as far away as possible from the existing buildings, and to diagram a kind of wedge that receives and re-emits solar radiation. And our first act of design was actually not the overall form of the structure, but rather designing the kind of material inputs that go into it. And so the first thing that we did was to check Craigslist to see if there were any greenhouse panels, polycarbonate dual chamber panels nearby, so that we didn't have to use petrochemically and carbon intensive structure, or I should say materials shipped from far away. But if these industrial materials already existed on the site, maybe we would be doing, let's say, like less harm. And luckily there was a farmer who had 24 6-foot by 23-foot panels of greenhouse polycarbonate sheets, a 15-minute drive away from the site. And so this was our kind of like initial input for the material systems of the project. And we also got connected with a series of building deconstruction and reuse nonprofits in the area who take apart homes and recycle the kind of 2x4s and other forms of like construction lumber, and started to design through ways of kind of like bundling or super scaling single 2x4s into larger, let's say not mass timber, but like mass lumber columns and beams. And when it came to the question of what to do on the kind of like thermally massive north wall of the structure, we were looking into a vernacular construction type of cordwood walls. In this case, thinking of maybe using bundles of firewood, which have a standard 18-inch depth, and surrounding them with hempcrete and a clay composite, as well as thinking through ways in which kind of light and shade move through the building, and foundations which use local stone rather than concrete. And so in a way, these became the kind of ingredients for the recipe of the building, which we poured back into the initial diagrammatic form of the kind of wedge in a few different ways. In this case, thinking about perhaps you always have to enter through the greenhouse and through a kind of ritualistic vessel of water in order to enter either of the other two thermally enclosed programs of the compost toilet or the sauna, or nestling everything a bit closer together and also taking advantage of maybe a kind of double height space for the wedge, as well as thinking about ways in which we can perform, let's say, the recycling of the water cycle through recapturing it through the forms of like sculptural scuppers and things like this. And in a way, these two directions got merged in a kind of round two that also sought to connect to a deck that the clients were hoping to dovetail with the structure, and a series of other kind of like technical components required from the programming, including like water tanks, a solar panel for the compost toilet, which uses a piston that requires a small draw of electrical power in order to push the waste out to the compost bin. But when we got to site earlier in the semester for a planned site visit, that idea had changed. As Steinbeck might remind us, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry, and in this case, the idea of dovetailing the deck with the rest of the greenhouse structure was immediately apparent that couldn't happen when we got to site. I think the clients had already constructed the deck that we can see in the top center right of the image, far away from where they had planned and desired the greenhouse. But it wasn't sort of all for naught. There were other kind of like productive neighborly interactions we had, learning about kind of tools and assembly techniques local to the kind of collectivized forms of labor in the mostly agricultural area, as well as a sawmill that happened to be a few blocks away, and other forms of like interspecies neighbors that the structure will share the site with. And so while we were on site, we also attempted to use kind of more digitally oriented surveilling tools of surveying, I should say. Scanning, for instance, rocks that the neighbors said that we could use for the footings of the structure, as well as getting a better understanding of the actual topography of the site and the slope itself. And it turns out, based on being on site, the slope is actually too severe for any of our initial plans. We're going to have to do a kind of patch and fill or cut and fill up the slope in order to make usable space for the greenhouse. And as such, our kind of plan of methods of assembly has changed. And so in the kind of pillow-like masonry volumes you see in the middle of this kind of, again, work in progress section, the infill now is going to be something like this, which is to say a bunch of earth bags. And directly then using the excavated site material that's necessitated to produce a kind of level foundation and raising that up and unitizing it into a form of thermally massive infill for the majority of the contained programs of the structure. Also being very excited about the kind of specific forms of tools that are used in this method of construction, the earth bag tamper, and the way in which it requires sort of many materials to collectively kind of compile and assemble and reform the earth in this way. Yeah. And thinking through interesting details of how we might bridge between the kind of soft earthen bags and the other forms of structural components involved in the structure. We estimate that this will take around 1,900 bags and 190 man-hours, which we've sort of subsumed into our spreadsheet for the process of construction for this hybrid structure, which is going to happen over the next 9 weeks and will not just actually involve the three of us, but what will be organized through a series of workshops which lean on the collective labor and kind of gift and sharing economy of the neighbors and friends of the clients in the area, as well as bringing people up from our home base of Cambridge and Boston. This is a photo that we were sent yesterday by the clients. We're kind of already off to the races, and they have begun to dig the foundation, as well as acknowledge the kind of hazardous and ad hoc nature of the process of kind of construction. And this is what it looks like from just a few hours ago. The client sent another photo, and we've already gotten the aggregate in for the base of the foundation of the structure. And we're hoping, over the next 9 weeks that an image looking something like this will eventually move to contain something like this, which is to say our schematic provisional work in progress idea of what this structure might be, by leveraging in both a kind of planned but also improvisational way the kind of reassembly of existing materials on site through kind of new but perhaps also familiar languages of assembly, and also to revive and explore new rituals related to kind of water, the body, and metabolic processes and the various forms of like heat and moisture they might emit. And so the image in the back might become subject to a kind of new thermal and aesthetic atmosphere over the course of the project. And that's where we are. Thanks so much.
So, I mean, do you guys want to come up here and then we can talk about it quickly and then go home? Thanks, Ian, for... I'm so jealous that you guys are so far along. I feel like we started at the same time and then but it's already there, so...
It helps when you're your own contractor.
Yeah, I suppose. We gotta get there, Nancy. Where's Nancy?
She's out front.
Oh, got it. All right. Does anyone have any comments or questions? It's fine too, I guess. No. Yeah. I mean, I have a question. I think the similarity is like the use of local materials and construction methods. I think the novel tectonic, I think there's something novel in each of our projects, like novel tectonics we can explore, like Jocelyn's, I think, manure sheet, fabric sheet. That was really cool. I mean, I thought that was really interesting. How did that come to the purview of your work in a way?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I invented. I think there's a lot of knowledge that happens in small, like that one, like there's a team working, I think it's, I want to say like Michigan State, there's like, or it's like a state, I think it's either Michigan State or Iowa State. I should know this, but I did that part of the project a little while ago, that have been working on manure fiberboard panels.
Yeah.
Basically like using similar kind of pressure treatment technologies that are used in plywood, but with manure.
Right.
Because manure is like a composite of like, I don't know, like different types of fiber, so it actually kind of could perform similarly, but it's one of those projects that started and didn't get funding to continue, I think because of popular aesthetic, I mean, people reacting to it poorly, but I think that's kind of the impetus of a lot of my research, is the fact that these waste materials have this strong like negative connotation, but in actuality what they're doing is registering what the wastefulness of these dominant operations that are happening on the site, that are often because of like corporate interest. The wastefulness is built into the process, so it's like, why not offer by turning the waste material into a product, and having that be the agency of the farmer or the individual on the site to be doing that and offering that, then suddenly it's kind of countering the big corporation, because they can be making secret profit off the waste. That's kind of what I'm arguing. So
Interesting.
yeah, so manure fiberboard being like one example, but like the wool especially, which I know Ian is also working with wool, which is, I just think wool is like really amazing, especially because sheep that are raised for meat, their wool is not used for anything. It's like completely a waste material, because it's just because they weren't raised for their wool, so it has all these qualities that like people who use wool in fiber art and in manufacturing, they don't want it. So people I've talked to who raise sheep for their meat, the wool usually goes into like pellets for fertilizer, or it goes into like cat toys, it goes into absolute, like they sell it for like nothing. They sometimes burn it. So there's like this whole kind of, there's all these networks by which material is released that is considered waste that actually has real utility within the building industry. So
That's interesting.
yeah.
I also kind of want to loop back into, I want to go back to your comment, but I also want to point out what Ian said, is like about being your own contractor. And I think that like all of us are doing it in a way. I think when Owen talked about finding loopholes or doing things that you couldn't possibly do in regular building construction because you're at a farm, right? And like James talking about how we should promote this way of working more as a kind of standard. I don't know, can you elaborate on that? Can you guys all elaborate on some of these things, or?
I mean, it's important. I mean, there's a question of like what kind of work you want to do, right? Because like the design bid build thing, like makes sense for a reason. It's like legal reasons. So I do think the thing that is in common with all the projects is that like both the design labor, let's say, and the construction labor is like somehow configured in a non-standard way.
Yeah.
And it does seem like non-standard configurations of this labor matrix are, you know, they're just gonna, for us to do anything, it's like necessary. It's not even a kind of a willful thing. It's just like somehow necessary.
Right. Yeah. Do you think that has? I mean, I think that's interesting because when we talk about like architectural discussions, I don't know. This isn't such a kind of public-oriented question, but when architects talk about building construction and architecture history, we've always been taught to think about it in certain ways, right? And like it took a long time for labor and material practice and this specific way to enter into the disciplinary conversation, and I think it's interesting because it's not just about labor, it's also about aesthetics and the way we present the building and how they're put together. And I think that both, all of you guys actually, Ian, but also James and Owen, when I talk about like tectonics, you know, Owen showed like how you could put pieces of wood together in different ways. I mean, we've all actually done it in all of our projects. Like I have my project, for example, utilizes like laminated 2x6. I don't know if it'll actually work, but we'll see. But like 2x6 is laminated together into T-shapes to produce a rigid long span structures. And Ian had bundled standard lumber into I don't know, you had a diagram of these wood structures being tied together, right? And then you had your own way of kind of putting together a system, which I think is an interesting question, right? Because it's like you're turning a standard building construction material into something more than what it is. And I think it's interesting to me because American framing has always been about this lightness, and that's why in some sense it's called balloon framing, because it goes up very quickly. And to rethink about this, we're rethinking about this because material comes into question, right? Like the manure, you can't possibly hang manure facade with a standard balloon frame. Maybe you need something more, you know, I think so. For me, it's not simply like a labor question, but also like an aesthetic and material question, right?
I guess to take that question one step further, like, do you guys feel like these kind of modalities of taking like a standard material but multiplying it or using it in an unusual tectonic in relationship to, I don't know, site conditions or availability of material or sourcing material from Craigslist, etc. Do you feel like that is something unique to working in a rural space, or do you feel like that is similar approaches that you would take to building a project in a totally different site and under different conditions?
Well, I mean, I think it might have to do with who's building it. Like when building a house, and hiring a proper contractor, and this house is in a neighborhood, they have their methods of building, which they're familiar with. It's very difficult to convince them to do anything else. It's very difficult to convince them to come out to the farm to build, and like your truck can't reach the site, and like yada yada yada. But I think when you cut that contractor out, or they're in a slightly uncomfortable role, new options are afforded.
I mean, it goes back to like the earlier conversation really about the we comes, or like the people who are from here and people who aren't from here. And part of what we're all talking about is, maybe to put it back to labor, it's like, do we actually have a relationship with the place? And that means people, that means Craigslist, that means the internet, that means in real life. Like, do we have a relationship with the place well enough that we are allowed, that we are able to, do it?
Yeah. And I think it's remarkable. I think like we talk about workshops, like Owen said he did a workshop, or like party, or you showed like an image of people having a party or something like that, and bringing communities together. And Ian, you talked about, doing like the schedule of like your friends coming down and doing something, but also like a workshop to how to put these. I imagine like you put like dirt. You're talking about the bags of dirt, like right. That's like an effort that needs to be done, not just by you guys, but your neighbor's friend or something like that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it is a really interesting point though, James, because I think there is something, I mean, I struggle with this even though like my family is from the place, like I'm technically from the place, but I don't live there now, and like when I go back, there's like this dissonance, and I think it's easy for, I mean, architecture is an extractive industry in many senses, but sometimes even working with a community can feel extractive if there's not like it's like, oh, it's a party to build a building, but then, I don't know, if people are in a place of economic precarity, maybe it's not, it's like, what are the benefits and what does it mean to work in rural areas if you're not from that community? Like, how does that...
If you're not invested in it long term.
Yeah, exactly.
Which also relates to some of the other comments that I forget his name made earlier. One of the other architects. Anyway. Ted, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this question of the kind of ad hoc, improvisational tectonics, and the question of like whether these are unique to operating in rural environments, I feel like the answer is more so that they're like possible, maybe exclusively in a regulatory sense in rural environments. One thing that we found super interesting in pursuing this project is we only had to submit one drawing to the building department, which was just a footprint of where the shed is going to be in space. It was just like a site plan with a box. And I guess this is recorded, so maybe we shouldn't say it, but like the compost toilet is not getting a permit, and like no one's coming to inspect it, and like all that the structures have to do is perform for the people using and building them, and in a way that allows the performance of their own internal assemblies to also become looser and stranger and more experimental. And I think like these questions also of like material tolerance and performance are really interesting in a lot of these projects as well, because I think for most of these structures they have to like do less, like they have to be less hermetically sealed, they have to perform like beneath the standard of performance of like a typical house or other forms of architecture that we like are trained to meet a kind of standard of care of in school, and in a way that allows manure, bags of earth, like softer, stranger decaying forms of like material tectonics to take shape, but it's all in service of producing affects which are different than like a suburban residential home, which I find like super exciting.
Well, I think the crowd is a little bit tired.
Just being very polite.
It's being polite, and I really appreciate everyone for coming out, and especially the presenters and my friends. I think we saw like about 10 presentations today, which is a lot, but each of the presentations described the context and the project in a very eloquent way, and I think that it was really, really helpful. And for me, being at Prattsville and listening to everyone talking about their project had been really, really educational. And because this is my context, and this is where the projects I'm doing are taking place, and so I'm really happy that I got a chance to talk to you guys, but also hear what you guys are working on, and it's been really wonderful. So thank you so much for engaging and talking.
Thank you. I think the bottom line, you're all on the same level. You know, it's all about, you have to work with what earth you have to start with. You got to deal with that, and along with all your products that go with it, you also have to entwine, well, is Mother Earth going to shake you up? You know, it's not like going to San Diego where it's sandy, you know, and then you got over here, oh, it's nice dirt here, and then you got a big boulder over there. So at the same token, you know, you all got that, and like this guy here went to the swamp, I call the swamp down there, and built a bee farm. You know? So you had to deal with the water, and the land down there is totally different than here. And in Wisconsin, farmland is different. The sandy beach, they decided to take the sand away, and now you got, you know, the mountain is not the mountain no more. So it's the same thing. It all comes down to the bottom line of what you got to work with. The footing is the base start. I'll put it that way. It's the footing, and then you build from that. But that's my opinion. And it's very nice to have listened to all you guys. I learned a little knowledge.
How long have you been building for?
Oh, 40 years.
I mean, 40 years.
I built this place right here.
Wow. But I mean, it's beautiful.
You know, because I'm from here, this is part of me. And after the flood, we wanted to make something, and it's the community. Like you say, it's all about the community. Everybody helps each other and you get along. And I work with I don't know if you've heard of AmeriCorps before, I work with those. And I've 20 years with 4-H, you know, so I've learned a lot myself. It's all about learning process.
Nice to meet you.
You all got some great ideas. But like you said, today's world is totally different. I mean, this building's been here for 200 years. They didn't have engineers back that day, but you know, today's world is different, and because you have to go with the new flow, because we don't know when it's going to be here. But like I say, you all have the same concept that you got to start with pumping. It's a good idea, so you guys got some good.
It means a lot.